Okay, the reading from Emmett Fox for today is called Hunger for Righteousness, and he's continuing to talk about the Beatitudes from Matthew's Gospel. And this one, it begins with the scripture, verse 6 from Matthew chapter 5. Blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled. Righteousness is another of the key words of the Bible, one of those keys that the reader must have in his possession if he or she is to get at the true meaning of the book. Like earth and meek and comfort, it is used in a special and definite sense. Righteousness means not merely right conduct, but right thinking. In the Sermon on the Mount, every clause reiterates the truth that outer things are but consequences. As within, so without. When people awaken to a knowledge of these truths, they naturally begin to apply them in their own lives. Realizing at last the vital importance of righteousness, they begin immediately to try to put their house in order. The principle involved is simple, but unfortunately, the exemplifying it is anything but easy. Now, why should this be so? The answer lies in the potency of habit. And habits of thinking are at once the most subtle and the most difficult to break. Perhaps failure to achieve righteousness is the failure of half-heartedness. You long, but not too deeply. Your hunger and thirst do not rise from a sense of total need. Have a mental stock-taking or a review of your life. It could not happen that a wholehearted search for truth and righteousness, if persevered in, should not be crowned with success. God is not mocked, nor does he mock his children. And the scripture is, blessed are they which do hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled.
And the Lamsa translation is, blessed are those who hunger and thirst for justice, for they shall be well satisfied. Well, that sort of fits with what I'm talking about. It's always interesting when we discover that the Fox quote for the day or commentary for the day fits what I'm told to talk about when I haven't thought to check what he had to say. And today, the title is At the End of a Perfect Day. And it started with a conversation I had with a friend of mine, a retired nurse. And she was talking to me about how every morning before she gets up, she takes a look at the day to see where she thinks she could bring some good to the world. And at the end of the day, she takes stock of how much good, if any, she's been able to give to the world. And if she's been able to do a few good things, she regards it as a good day. And as I thought about that afterward, I was reminded of an old song. I've never heard the song. Actually, never had seen the lyrics aside from At the End of a Perfect Day. And it's titled A Perfect Day. It was written in 1910 by Carrie Jacobs Bond. And I assume somewhere in the internet universe there is a recording of it. But I'm going to read the lyrics. Some are fit for this and some not, but you may as well hear the whole thing. When you come to the end of your perfect day and you sit alone with your thought while the chimes ring out with a carol gay for the joy that the day has brought, can you think what the end of a perfect day can mean to a tired heart? When the sun goes down with a flaming ray and dear friends have to part. Well, this is the end of a perfect day, near the end of a journey too. But it leaves a thought that is big and strong, with a wish that is kind and true. For memory has painted this perfect day with colors that never fade. And we find at the end of a perfect day the soul of a friend we've made. So, perfect day, accomplishment, bringing good, and thinking about that, thinking about the lyrics, I realized that when I think of bringing good to the world, I've been having a very constricted thought of what bringing good is. You know, smiling at the cashier or wishing him or her well, picking something up that someone has dropped, calling someone to check in on them because they may be in struggle. And I was sort of brought up short. This is where the divine comes in and sort of shakes you up. And I realized that's a narrow definition. It's a narrow definition. When we are of God's stuff, made of God's stuff, and we're interacting with this whole universe of God's stuff. And that brought to mind, well, first I was thinking I'd come across a list of 12 spiritual disciplines, but no, that didn't fit. In fact, the 12 spiritual disciplines in many ways counteract my experience with the divine, because they're talking about how you have to work hard and study hard and be prepared to suffer. And it's like, oh no, that's not what God taught me. And then I remembered the Quaker testimonies. Now, Quakers talk of testimony. It's not exactly a discipline, but it's a guide to living and responding to the divine within in a way that brings good to the earth. And they have 5 different testimonials that they walk with. It's sort of a guide to practical everyday witnessing to your spiritual beliefs, in action, in words, in deeds, in prayer. And so the 5, the acronym is SPICES. Simplicity. I'm going to hit them, then I'm going to come back and talk about them. Peace, integrity, community, equality, and stewardship. So think of it in terms of our existence in this earth plane, in this broader universe that is all divine energy, divine love. So simplicity is all about focusing on the essential, whether it's the essential love of God, how you live, how you work, avoiding excess, prioritizing the simplicity of God's love over the excess of riches, wealth, going beyond to things that can distract you. It's the belief that a person ought to live a simple life in order to focus on what is most important and minimize that which, in divine terms, in terms of divine love, is not near so important. So our life ideally is organized in a way that frees us from unnecessary material or emotional burdens, so that we have a clearer walk with our spiritual values, with God's love representing the divine. And because we're not burdened with distractions, we're more open to divine guidance. And the sort of subset is that the character that we choose to be and live, our spiritual life, is way more important than material things. That's not saying you need to give it up. This is where I disagree with many religions. But the minute you start putting all your emphasis, your thoughts, on the material to the neglect of your spiritual, to the neglect of walking in the light, as Quakers say, you're moving away from simplicity. The testimony of peace, which has multiple levels. There's the sharing of peaceful love with those around you. There's maintaining peaceful interactions, even when you're provoked. There is working to facilitate the bringing of peace between people or organizations that are in disharmony. But it's all from the standpoint of divine love. The Quakers have a specific quote. This is a quote from George Fox in 1660 when he made a declaration to King Charles II. He said, "We utterly deny all outward wars and strife and fightings with outward weapons, for any end, under any pretense whatsoever. This is our testimony to the whole world. The Spirit of Christ by which we are guided is not changeable, so as once to command us from a thing as evil and again to move us unto it. And we certainly know and testify to the world that the Spirit of Christ, which leads us into all truth, will never move us to fight and war against any man with outward weapons, neither for the kingdom of Christ nor for the kingdoms of this world. Therefore, we cannot learn war anymore." Think of that in terms of where we are today. Whether we're talking the governmental wars going on throughout the world, or the number of strife-filled relationships and attacks, where the evincing of love, even one-on-one, can make such a big difference. Not long ago, I attended a seminar by one of the elders of the transactional analysis movement, and he was teaching a new frame of reference for some of TA work. And he said something that, to this day, I can't say it haunts me, but I'm never far from thinking of it. And in my work in lift-on therapy, I am reminded so often of its truth. He said to those of us, and he was addressing people who use transactional analysis as a healing tool. He said, and I think this is as close to a perfect quote as I give, the most important thing that you as a counselor can do for a client is to show them love, because so many of them have never felt it. That's part of peace. That's something that each one of us can do. And from what I know of the people I'm looking at here, every one of you does that in your own way. You are light workers, you are love givers. But this is another part of what can be a perfect day, when you can say, I showed love to someone who needed it, or to the world that needed it. And it could even be showing love by going out and marching on the No King's Day. There is so much discomfort, and hatred. Let our actions match our words of love in our daily behavior. And then there's the C in spices, community. This is supporting one another, creating a welcoming environment, ensuring that you're serving as an advocate for those around you. Another quote from Quakers. When community is our testimony, we love our neighbor as ourselves. Our outward actions reveal spiritually rooted alternatives to the ways of the wider culture. We model growing spiritually and help others do the same. We proclaim a different way to live. It challenges each of us to put a relationship with God at the center of our lives and let that shape all of our relationships with each other and with the larger world. In transactional analysis and in LIFT, one of our goals is to help someone who's come because they are not in a comfortable place in their lives, is to help them, to quote Eric Byrne, feel welcomed, loved, and accepted by the world. That's what the community testimony is all about. That in our walk each day, how can we help someone? What can we do with someone to help them feel welcomed, loved, and accepted by the world? We're lucky enough that we have this small community here, even though we're distant geographically. The amount of caring that I see everyone showing for one another, just watching it touches me deeply. Each of you is such a wonderful exemplar of showing love to the world, of walking. There's an old Quaker song, which I will not try to sing. I'd rather be a jolly St. Francis, hymning a canticle to the sun, than a dour old sober-sized Quaker whose diet would appear to have been spiritual persimmons. My take in my interactions with each of you is, a major part of the time anyway, you're all singing canticles to the sun and smiling and welcoming the people that you interact with. And that's what the community testimony is all about. Being aware, being able, smiling, letting your love show, commiserating when someone is hurting, welcoming them, even if they are way different from us. So that's the SPIC of spices. The E is equality, which is recognizing that we all have that of God within. In fact, we all, from our standpoint, I believe, we are all God's stuff. And we all have special gifts to share and problems to be supported and to be helped out of. You know, the Quakers, from the time they began, welcomed women into leadership positions when that was just not done back in those days. They stood against the enslaving of any human in any form, because we're all made of God's stuff. And anything we can do in our walk through life to recognize those around us as God's stuff, to interact with them as equals. Now, bear in mind, interacting as equals sometimes means holding them up to the light or eldering them, as Quakers say, tough love. But that's equality, as opposed to, oh dear, they couldn't possibly put up with this, so I better treat them respecting each other is also speaking truth. In fact, did I talk about integrity, or did I skip it over?
I think you skipped it.
I think I skipped integrity. Oops. Let's go back to integrity. Integrity, S-P-I. Okay, walking in truth through the world, which fits also for equality, walking in truth through the world. And that quote that I gave from George Fox to King Charles, he was speaking truth to power. When you live a life of integrity, that is your testimonial to walking in righteousness as the divine would have us do. Let's see what else I had to say about it that I skipped over. Okay, so it's living as a whole person in divine order. It is speaking truth in all situations. And a sidebar, Quakers used to refuse to take loyalty oaths. They would speak truth from the power and the righteousness within them, but they would not swear. Integrity means taking action, even in the face of people who think you should not. I had a very simple example of that. I was standing in a long line at the post office yesterday. Talk about mismanagement. There were like 30 people in line. There was only one person working the desk. You could feel empathy for her. And most people were empathetic. I only heard one person grumble. And as I was slowly inching up the line, I noticed an American Express gold card on the ground. At first I thought it was just an advertisement, but then I thought, well, let's make sure. Sure enough, it was somebody's lost American Express gold card. Well, it would have been easy to take it home with me, and
Never do that.
no, I wouldn't. But I saw someone eyeing me, wondering what I was going to do with it. I said, is anyone missing an American Express gold card? I shouted out, tell me your name, and if it's the right one, I'll give it to you. Nobody answered. And I turned to the woman who was giving me the side eye and said, okay, well, I guess the thing I'm going to do is give it to the lady up there. What else is there to do? And she smiled at me. But that's living with integrity. Having a little fun with it, too. But there's so many opportunities to do something that isn't filled with integrity. And Clayton Christensen, the great business philosopher, said, it's easy to hold steady in righteousness. And it looks really easy to make one decision that isn't. But then the next decision that isn't is even easier. And the one following that is even easier. And it is a steady travel downward from there. So your testimony of integrity is living your life with integrity, being an example to others without necessarily even preaching. Though there's an old Quaker story, I have no idea if it's true or not, but it would fit, of a Quaker riding through the wilderness in the United States back in the 1600s when a bandit jumped out of the bushes, pistol at the ready, and robbed the guy. Demanded all his money, demanded all the values he had, and the Quaker gave it without fuss. Then he demanded the Quaker step down so he could steal the horse too, and the Quaker stepped down, and the robber got on, and then the Quaker grabbed the reins and said, "I will let you have my goods, I will let you have my horse, but I cannot let you ride away when your soul is at stake," and gave him a preaching about the righteousness versus the horrors that await if you move into unrighteousness. And the story is the robber was so moved or so frightened he gave the Quaker everything back and walked off. But again, that's living with integrity and speaking truth to power. So living with integrity also involves responding with honor to each person you deal with. That's where the equality comes in. Because we are all made of God stuff. We are all built on love, whether we choose to exemplify it and radiate it or not. And then finally, the final S in SPICES, stewardship. Stewardship of that which God has given us, taking good care of it. Stewardship includes taking good care of this earth plane, of this existence, this galaxy, this universe, which is all God stuff. What have you done today? Would be the question. What have I done today that helps care for this environment, helps care for this world, manages what I have responsibly and takes good care of it, helps others manage more responsibly. It's, if you will, it's sort of a coming together of all our testimonials, because good stewardship involves equality, involves integrity, involves bringing peace where there is no peace, involves not overusing that which the earth has to provide. Interestingly, I read a number of 20 and 30 somethings now are finding that they are no longer at peace with the climb of the corporate ladder, the acquire. Many of them are living simply, saving maximally, so that at some point early in their lives, they're no longer on the treadmill and no longer using so many resources just to live. So stewardship has a reference to everything else we do. And thinking of these, look at the metrics by which you can determine what good you've brought to the world. It isn't going to be just, did I smile at someone? Did I pat a child on the head? Did I give the child a lollipop? Or anything like that. There are so many aspects of who we are, how we live, that bring good to this existence. So, at the end of each day, as we prepare to slumber, to think about simplicity. What have I done? Peace. What have I contributed? Have I lived in integrity with the universe, with God's love today? Have I helped build community among my friends or outside my immediate circle? Have I allowed myself to enter into community someplace where I have not been before? Have I treated the world with equality? And I'd extend that to animals too, by the way. And finally, have I been a good steward of that which the divine has given me? Have I set the example of good stewardship as I've walked through the world? And if we can say yes to even one thing in every one of those, boy, it's been a perfect day, because that's the best we'll ever do. Maybe two things. Hey, that's a hell of a great day. And that's what I have to say. Let us continue walking through to make this world a better place. So that's what I have to say. Does anyone else have a contribution? Ellie? Yes, no? Yes, okay.
Um,
She got it.
Very
Okay.
good talk. Um, I love acronyms, so when you said spices, I'm like, oh, there's a message there. Um, and in Judaism, there's something similar. I mean, words of Yeshua. Um, he was talking to the Pharisees, I think at this point, or the religious crowd. It, and he was saying, I think someone asked him what was the most important of the law, and he said, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might, and um, love your neighbor as yourself. And so in Judaism, the first one is called Shema, which is to listen. The second one is called Lahafta, and to love. So when you're doing both of those, you're doing the rest of the instruction. And a lot of people think, oh, you're under the law. I'm sure you've heard that terminology before. Torah meaning the law. But what it actually means is instruction instead of law. And when I realized that years ago, I was like, oh, instruction is no more than a parent giving something to a child or a friend giving another friend words of wisdom. And so when you're loving the divine with all your heart, soul, and might, and when you're loving your neighbor as yourself, you're doing the feet and hands of those instructions. Something physical and palatable. Because I've heard, a lot of people say, well, I can't follow what's in that book or any spiritual book, that have laws and instructions in them. Well, can you love the divine with all your heart, soul, and might? Do you have a relationship with the divine? Do what is that relationship like? And can you love your neighbor as yourself? Well, yes, the most common answer. Well, then you're doing what the instructions say to do. So when things are broken down, simplicity, like how you did with spices, it doesn't seem hard at all. It shows the simplicity of the very thing that, as you were saying, the community showing outward what's inward.
Thank you. Somebody else with a contribution?
Just a couple things is I'm just reflecting on the Emmett Fox reading, as within, without. You just connects with what Ellie was saying, and the other part about the righteousness. What was it? Blessed are they which hunger and thirst after righteousness, for they shall be filled, or who hunger and thirst after justice, they shall be filled. But spices definitely, to live a life full of righteousness and justice. Spices fits that also. I'm also reminded of this little book that is a copy, I guess, of Abraham Lincoln's prayer book. And in a section, it struck me because somebody asked him once, he read the Bible all the time, asked him why he didn't belong to a church. And I think if I'm remembering correctly, his response was, when I walk into a church and see the words, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and your neighbor as yourself, that will be a church that I join. I think that's interesting. Anyway, that's it.
Okay. We thank you, God, for having brought us together, for having enabled us to share our individual walks and learnings, for having enabled us to share our caring for one another today. Thank you for having provided us this community where we can walk together, joy together, sorrow together, pray together. Thank you for walking with us and being in us and of us as we depart from here, as we depart open to your leading, your guidance. Help us to be your hands, your voice, your feet on the ground as we seek with you to lift this earth up to an ever more wonderful place and ultimately to a paradise of love. We give you gratitude for all the good in our lives and all the love that fills us, God. We say thank you for all this good and all this love. Help us to work with you today and this week. Amen.